This past week during the mission trip, our nightly Bible study theme was about taking a risk. We looked at some biblical figures to examine the risks they took. Figures like Moses and Joshua, Daniel, and the disciples. And we were then challenged during the week to do something each day that might be described as taking a risk. Each night after our readings and study, we asked the question, what risk did we take today? Some of the answers were astounding. On the first night, they started out rather simple. But as the week progressed, some of what they described involved actions taken beyond the superficial. Actions taking some outside their comfort zones. None of the risks they took placed them in any physical danger, as the risks of those figures we examined had done. However, the risks they took did create a kind of vulnerability, in that they faced potential ridicule, embarrassment, even condemnation. Here's the thing. They didn't experience any of that. Instead, what they say they experienced was grace. The things they thought that they had done poorly, they learned really weren't all that monumental at all. And I think we can all relate to that. How often do we feel that we have goofed up so badly we just are beyond forgiveness? Or that in our failure we have somehow let another down? Or maybe even contributed to their inability to accomplish what they were trying to do, only to learn that our fears were misplaced. Repeatedly, Jesus asked the disciples to take a risk. From their calling, he has asked them to follow him, sharing a message that defies reason. He asked them to share the good news of the kingdom's nearness, despite what they look around and see. He asked them to believe in a hope that does not appear to mesh with the world's reality. Today, in today's reading, he asks them not to fear the one who can kill the body, but instead to fear the one who can destroy both body and soul. For many, all they had was their body. Death was in many ways a release from the hell they endured. But this is not to say they looked forward to death. To live, they bowed down to the wishes of worldly power, often at the expense of their obligations to God. And Jesus points out this kind of living has consequences. While we may find some sense of contentment in succumbing to the world around us, it is a world beyond us we are to focus upon. Neither option comes without risk. If we embrace the world, we are in danger of losing ourselves. And if we embrace God, we risk the few blessings this world has to offer. Today's reading has one of what are called the hard sayings of Jesus. He says he came to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and that one's foes would be members of their own household. If the work of Jesus was to reconcile the world with God and one another, it is not easy to see how creating division helps build and strengthen relationships. The truth is, it doesn't. So what is Jesus saying? Earlier, Jesus reminds the disciples in Israel to love the Lord their God with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their mind, and with all their body. In other words, they are to love God completely. Nothing was meant to come between them and their God, but it had. People then are just like people today. When confronted with a failure, they are quick to look for excuses. In this case, it was the bond of family. Faced with the question of who comes first, God or family, many today, like then, say family. Jesus says, now wait a minute. The right answer is God. Some say this pits God against the family, that God is somehow jealous of the love families share. Quite the contrary. God does not want to be the object of love, but the purveyor, the distributor of love. And not just any kind of love, but love that has the power to overcome our shortcomings. Love that unites. Love that helps us to know there is no one else. When we love God with that kind of love, the love of all of who we are, that is the same love that we receive. And when we do, we find we are able to love others more deeply than we ever thought possible. Now, in fairness, Jesus knew what he was telling the disciples was hard. That they would risk losing what they have. He knew something that they didn't. That we are all family. Family is not limited to those who are just immediately around us with the same last name. God is part of our family. Humanity is part of our family. And if we want to know God's love, we look to one another. As I tell people in my wedding sermon, we do this to see God's love revealed in and through the other. Remember that image of the wagon wheel the presiding bishop used to describe how a relationship with one another and with God seems to work? As we draw closer to God down the rail, down the spoke, we are naturally drawn closer to one another. And as we all come down our own spoke and draw closer to one another, we are naturally drawn closer to God. Now, if everyone traveled at the same speed down their own little spoke, it would be like concentric circles growing ever smaller. But the truth is, some stop along the way. Some never leave the rim. Some don't feel called to be closer to another or to God. These are the people Jesus says we find ourselves separated from. We cannot drag them with us, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we love them. The point Jesus is making is that we must journey on. We may leave them behind for a time, but there's something else Jesus knew when he said this. That there will be a time when those who do not seek God will be found by God. And how is that possible? Let's use that wagon wheel image again. if everyone is continuously brought closer to God and the center of that wheel, sooner or later, that center becomes overcrowded. Meaning, one can only get so close to God. And instead of harmony, there would likely be chaos as we all try to vie to get a little bit closer and a little bit closer. To overcome this, once we are filled with God's love, we are sent back out from the center to share it. Think of that rippling effect in the ever-widening circles of a stone thrown into water. We take this love back to those we have left behind in hopes of seeing the difference God love makes in our lives, that they will then seek it in theirs too. Now here's something to ponder. If we are constantly sharing, can we ever run out? Some think so and are afraid to share it freely. Others take a risk, and in sharing they find that it is an unending supply of love, like a well that never runs dry. Still, most of us find returning to the source of God's love as the only way of knowing refreshment. It is this constant ebb and flow between the rim and the center that enables us to pick up those who may have stalled along the way. This means there is always hope for those who chose not to join us as we began to follow Jesus and draw closer to God. Jesus tells his disciples, and he tells us, fear not. He invites us, as we invited our youth on mission, to take a risk. A risk that lets go of our fears and those things that hold power over us. A risk that challenges us to follow him so that we might know God's love in and through him, and so others might come to know it in and through us. A risk that will, with God's help, enable us to love more deeply than we ever thought possible. If we are willing to take such a risk, we might just find, as our youth did on mission, that when we look with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our body, we cannot help but see God's love all around us. Isn't seeing this for ourselves worth the risk? Isn't helping someone else to see this our calling? Amen.